Since the dawn of civilization, spies of every nation and culture have worked to infiltrate their adversaries and glean the information that will give their side the advantage. The stakes are sky high, the strategies varied and imaginative, and the ultimate sign of success is that no one ever even knew you were there. In each episode, we will explore the moral and ethical gray zones of espionage, where treachery and betrayal go hand in hand with cunning and courage. This is the Spycraft 101 podcast. Welcome to your clandestine classroom. This is episode number 125 of the Spycraft 101 podcast. My guest this week is Robert Lancaster. Robert served in the British Army from 1977 until 1989, including time spent with 22nd SAS, and then in the Australian Army as a Reserve Special Forces soldier. In 1991, he founded Lancaster's Global Risk Consultancy, based in Australia, which has offered a wide variety of security, surveillance, business intelligence, and counterintelligence services all over the world. His previous clients include governments, multinational corporations, publicly listed companies, law firms, and major industrial and mining concerns. I invited Robert onto the podcast because I wanted to explore the world of privatized intelligence gathering and how it relates to and differs from the actions of national organizations and agencies. But before we begin, I want you to consider something. Have you ever wished that your sunglasses protected you from more than just the sun? Maybe you're sitting in traffic and you're suddenly thinking about your airbag deploying. Sometimes we all wish we had this kind of durable protective gear with us, but we don't want to wear Oakley M frames every day that make us look like we're about to invade Fallujah. Well, my friends at Grayman & Company think the same way. They think about what they can do to provide more capability without compromising your classic aesthetic. Spies don't look tactical. James Bond doesn't look tactical. He looks stylish. He looks elegant. Grayman & Company make impact-resistant sunglasses, including prescription lenses, as well as cut-resistant gloves, merino polo shirts, and custom-tailored suits with all sorts of features for guys who might need to look their best, but be ready for anything. Check them out at grayman.co. The sunglasses have been huge sellers, and more are arriving soon. And use the discount code SPYCRAFT101 for 10% off. Robert, thank you for joining me today.
Good to speak to you, Justin.
I appreciate it. I have to admit that I was a little bit surprised back when you first accepted my invitation for an interview, because you keep sort of like a lower online profile than a lot of my previous guests, like these authors and journalists and that sort of thing. So this was a really unique opportunity for me, and I did not want to miss out on the chance to talk to you.
No problems at all.
Great. So can you take me back to the beginning of your story, like what made you join the British Army to begin with?
Well, my father was in the army, his father, father and son. There's a Lancaster tradition for going back over 300 years. For me, it was always going to be on the cards that I was going to join the army, which I did at the age of 16 years old.
Oh my gosh, 300 years. That's quite a legacy for your family.
Yep. Well, the Lancasters, I think there's only 5 families in the UK that have sort of accumulated that father-son type situation.
Yeah, that's impressive. I'm amazed by that, honestly. And I believe that you started out in the infantry. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, I did 12 months at what's called the Infantry Junior Leaders Battalion. So because I joined as a boy soldier, age 16. Did pretty well there, passed out in charge of my company, Peninsula Company. From there, I then joined an infantry unit, a well-known county regiment called the Devonshire and Dorset Regiment. And I served all over the place with them. And then my latter part of the service, after passing selection, was 22 SAS.
Okay, yeah, that's a legendary organization. Obviously, I know that you know better than anyone. But can you describe that selection process for it? I have to imagine it's incredibly difficult.
Well, the first time that I tried selection, I was actually based in Berlin at the time. There's not too many big hills there to train on. I attended selection, and on test week, I actually tore my Achilles tendon and was basically pulled off, medically discharged. In my mind, I always thought that I'd be able to pass, so I went back 12 months later, gave it another go, was given time off to train on the hills on that occasion, and then I passed selection. Now, selection In my period, I understand it's changed a little bit now, but when I carried out selection, there was the initial first couple of weeks were sort of build-up training and basically getting rid of a lot of the people that turned up with expectations that it was going to be easier than what it actually was. On the first week, on the Friday, there's a thing called the fan dance, which is down up and down the Penafan, which is in South Wales, the highest sort of mountain around there, other than Snowdon, which is in North Wales. And that sort of cuts a fair few people out. I think there's about 280 people attempted selection initially. Then after the hills phase, there was about 152. So going back to that 2 weeks of doing joint sort of training, the third week is then going out on your own, going to various checkpoints over various hills in South Wales, the Alang Valley, covering the Brecon Beacons, the Black Mountains. And then the last part of it is what's called Test Week. Test Week actually lasts for 10 days, not the 7 days as indicated. And the last part of that is basically a fairly horrendous sort of 65 kilometres, but if you're taking into consideration the contouring and the extra sort of going around sort of dangerous rocky areas, you're probably near the 80 kilometres. You're carrying a 65-pound Bergen, 15-pound belt order. At my time, I was carrying an SLR with a sort of had lead put in there to indicate a fully loaded weapon, another probably 15 pounds. Then you've got your water and food on top of that. Then those people that pass that then go on to what's called continuation training. And during that 10-day period of test week, basically you start off with the lengths and distances that you go are increased. As indicated, you're there on your own and you've just got to meet the times. And during that period, quite a few people actually pull off and resign themselves, and others just get pulled off either injured or they're just making the times. So getting back to it, 150 odd people pass the hills phase of its continuation training. That sort of signals, learning Morse code, head training, weapon training, all sorts of other training, sort of tying in and introducing you to the SAS way of doing things. During that period, the officers go off and do what's called test week. So they go and do something fairly different where they're given various leadership tasks. Then everyone gets back together again, and then you're sent over to either Brunei in Borneo or Belize in sort of Central America. For me, it was Borneo, Brunei. What you do then is you have a significant sort of lead up training, various aspects of jungle warfare drills. Basically, it's to the extent that you become a jungle warfare instructor. And then the last part of it is a very extended exercise. I was pretty lucky. I was given quite a few command appointments. And I actually found the enemy camp during a CTR, a close target recce of a location. Given a number of other command appointments, that sort of went on. And then you pulled out at the end. For me, I was given the command appointment of being in charge of the withdrawal. So if I'd have conked up there, I'd have actually been stuck there for another week or a couple of weeks, and by then you've virtually run out of all of your food. But managed to get everyone on the choppers, out of the location, back to the camp, big cleanup. Then you actually then get a weekend off. And then after that, then there's the combat and survival stage, which the qualification you get is combat and survival warfare instructor. And that involves being taught how to live off the land, then doing various sort of, I suppose, being out on the ground, doing various sort of exercises and living off the ground. Then you go on a escape and evasion, which I believe the Americans called the SEER, where you are given Second World War combat uniforms. You're sent off and you've got to cover, I believe for me it was about 200, 220 miles of northern Wales at that point. It was in the sort of winter months, so it's freezing, sometimes minus 15, and all you've got is a Second World War greatcoat to keep you warm. And then you go from A to be and go to various checkpoints, and then from there you're given another location to get to, and you're supposed to be living off the land, but it's pretty hard to do that because you're mobile, you're moving the whole time to get to the next checkpoint, which may be 20 miles away. Moving at night, because at the same time you've got 200, 300, even 400 at times hunter force after you. With us, we have the powers, and then they line you up to be captured. I thought I was getting captured early, so I ended up getting in fisticuffs with the hunter force. I then broke away and managed to run through a barbed wire fence that cut me to pieces. Got in fisticuffs again, basically virtually knocked unconscious, pretty much filled in, and then loaded on the chopper and taken to another location where you're interrogated. Now, that interrogation is supposed to go on for a maximum of 30 hours, and it's 30 hours to be awarded the Combat Survival Instructor's Certificate or qualification. But with the guys who are on SAS selection, it goes on for longer. And for mine, I believe it went on for about 40 hours. And during that time, you're put in stress positions, you've got white noise being played, you're being interrogated left, right, and centre, dragged to certain locations, stripped naked in front of female officers and bashed around a bit and all sorts of stuff. So that was fairly tough, I must admit. By the end of it, I actually was slightly hallucinating. I was hearing helicopters landing and taking off when I was told on the debrief that didn't actually occur. With the white noise, I was hearing opera music, which again, they told me that didn't occur. So there's a couple of things there. So your mind starts playing tricks on you. And then after that, then you're told that yes or no, you've sort of got through it. Then everyone was then taken to the sort of briefing room at Stirling Lines at Hereford. And those people that passed were told to stay, and those that didn't pass were basically binned. And there wasn't many left out of that, just under 300 by that end. And then from there, you have another weekend or a couple of days off, and then you actually go on to what's called black training, which is basically sort of counter-terrorism and introduction to counter-terrorism and doing room combat drills and hostage rescue at a training establishment outside of Hereford. And you sort of do that for about 10 days, which is quite exciting, which was what everyone sort of thinks the SAS is all about, wearing all the black Gucci gear with the MP5s going in and sort of doing the room combat drills. Once that's done, and no one basically fails that, those guys are power qualified, because during my selection, over 50% of the candidates on selection were from either 1, 2, or 3 power. So they went off and joined their squadrons, while with someone like me, who was basically called a crap at, because we come from the infantry, we then went off, did the parachute course, basic parachute course at Fries Norton, just outside of Oxford, and you do your standard sort of 8 to 10 jumps, and at the end of that, you're awarded your standard British wings and also the SAS wings at the same time, which I still actually have my set that I was awarded after that. I kept hold of those. Then after that, then you join your squadron. For me, most of my friends joined B Squadron. I joined A Squadron, so I went straight on what's called the team, which was the counter-terrorism team. From there, the rest of my career in 22 SAS.
Wow. My gosh, that is a whole lot. I'm shocked that anybody makes it through some of the things that you described. And honestly, Robert, the thing that stuck out to me most is your only real description of everything that happened to you was that it was fairly tough, which I can see that you kind of downplayed it. It seems like a lot more than fairly tough to me, but clearly you made it through in the end.
Yes, I did. I must admit, I've done pretty well in life.
Amazing.
One of my proudest achievements is to be awarded that Sandy Berry.
Yeah, well deserved. Certainly, I can see why that would make you so proud. So, Robert, all of that training and all of that time that they put into you, did they get their use out of you after that? Did you have to deploy for real world operations not long after you completed all the training?
Well, the team is basically real world. You're there, any counter-terrorism actions in the UK covered by the team. When you're on the team, you're either on 30 minutes or 3 hours notice to move. There were a number of incidents or operations. The other part, which I don't really want to talk about, was that members of the team that had already spent a fair bit in Northern Ireland, which I had, were at times deployed to Northern Ireland to assist the SAS unit over there, the troop, on any of their operational activities.
Okay, yeah, we've discussed Northern Ireland a couple of times here on the podcast, and it's probably going to come up again in the future. Do you have any perspective at all that you can offer on what was going on there at the time that you were in the 22nd SAS?
Yeah, look, I'm more happy to talk about my time in the infantry in relation to the SAS. There were units of SAS that were permanently based in Northern Ireland. And then, as I've indicated, there was a team that could back them up. Two sort of worked hand in hand with 14 INT, which was sort of an intelligence and surveillance gathering unit of the British Army as well. So basically the SAS, a lot of surveillance, ambushing and active operations, and sometimes even being babysitters to spooks or whatever that were dealing with some of the intelligence sources over there.
Okay, so you were like a quick reaction force or something like that, basically, if anything went wrong?
Well, not really. They was permanently tasked over there, but that was the permanent. So there was the guys in the squadrons based in Hereford. The squadrons go on different roles, so whether it's being on the team for 6 months, whether it's going deploying overseas on either exercises or jobs, whether it was going on training other nations' special forces. It was a very dynamic period of time. So you went from one thing to another, and you basically you're permanently busy. And separate to that, there were individuals that were picked to join what I've indicated as the troop, and they were based permanently in Northern Ireland, and they'd go there for a year or 2 year deployment, and they were changed over after those periods of time.
Okay, I see. I'm sure that this time with the 22nd was just unforgettable and very high operational tempo. So did all of that prepare you for the company that you would go on to start later on? I mean, did you feel like this was the kind of thing that you could, move into in the civilian world a few years down the road?
Well, when I was in the infantry, I spent just under 3 years in Northern Ireland, mostly around South Armagh, and a lot of that was intelligence gathering, a lot of surveillance, a lot of OPs, a lot of patrolling, and then doing what was called lurks. So you get somewhere, and if something was of interest, you would actually just sort of get yourself into almost like a reactive OP and sit there and watch. Other times you'd have specific long-term OPs in place, and within that infantry unit, within all infantry units, there was also a unit called COP, the Close Observation Platoon, which is specialised in surveillance. So I did a lot of surveillance in Northern Ireland, and so that certainly put me in good stead to what I was later going to do in the private sector. You'd sort of work hand in hand as well, sort of protecting the RUC, and then within the actual bases where you was located, at times I was the base commander of a small border base in a place called Middletown. And so there you would sort of cover the whole of the tactical area of operation. That's using CCTV, long range, different optics. That's arranging the patrols, doing border-based patrols and inspections, and basically dominating the local area. On top of that, there was a vehicle search facility in that location, which again helped me in my business in later on, because from those techniques that I learned there, I ended up forming a number of courses for the Australian Customs, now known as the Australian Border Force. A lot of lessons that I learned in Northern Ireland, I certainly put into practice within my company, Lancaster Global Risk.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Honestly, I was kind of looking at it from the SAS perspective, of course, but what you just described makes a lot more sense to me now that I think about it. So how early on did you decide on your own that you would form a company of your own? You would become an entrepreneur essentially after you left the service. Was that something that you had as a vision for like quite some time?
Not really initially. Initially, when you transition out of the military, it's, I wouldn't say scary. I was pretty positive because with a background of my experience, in Northern Ireland and in 2-2, I was pretty employable. So as soon as I left, as soon as I decided that I'd had enough being in the military, I'd actually just gone through a divorce at that time as well, and I sort of pulled the pin. So as soon as I got out, I was offered a number of different roles doing close protection and security for various different people. I was never interested in doing the pop stars or movie stars or any of that sort of stuff. That was available, but I wasn't interested in that. So I'd do sort of low risk individuals and sometimes even royalty, foreign royalty. One of the roles that I had, there's a guy called Bradley Westinger. He was President Prime Minister of Sri Lanka's right-hand man, and he was in the UK to organise £16 million in aid for Sri Lanka, and also the purchase of about 320 Leyland buses. Now, he arrived from Sri Lanka into London, and he just had his family targeted, and about 15 members of his family had been assassinated by the Tamil Tigers. They managed to have some people in London that cut off a pig's head and put it outside of his apartment, and he had a very, very secure apartment in Notting Hill, even to the extent that he had a metal plated armoured door. That was the only way in and out to get there, other than he had a sort of an escape route with a fire exit, and that had a secure sort of containment cage as well. So I ended up sort of looking after him, being one-on-one, and also organising the protection team around him. After all of that, I was then approached in a full-time role for a company called Appraisal Services. And so I became their operations manager, and there was two directors, and one of the director's sons was my immediate boss. Within 12 weeks, I sort of highlighted my skill sets, and I was put as his boss. I then formed a close protection wing within that company, and also an enhanced surveillance wing. They were doing basic sort of surveillance at the time for various law firms and a couple of their retail clients. I then enhanced all that, also enhanced their bureau de change operations, where they were doing all these test purchases with all the bureau de changes. They ran basically all of the security and test purchasing within London, and also in a couple of other places for about 3 different companies that ran bureau de changes. So yeah, and from coming up with a number of different systems and basically putting long hours in, working 7 days a week actually for about 3 months. And yeah, I had the promotion. And then when I was offered this role to go to Australia, I'd also met another lady by then that sort of reinforced that desire to move to Australia. They then offered me a directorship, which I declined, and then did move to Australia then. So that whole time, I didn't sort of really think that I'm going to be running my own company. And even when I got to Australia initially, I was going to have interviews to join one of the government agencies in Australia, which after going through part of their interview process and finding out the very, very minimal wage that it was going to pay, I decided not to do that. And then I actually then went into 2 very long-term undercover roles. And still, I wasn't sort of thinking about joining my company then, but after the extended period of undercover and doing other contract work, by then I'd made a number of pretty good contacts because I joined the Reserve Special Forces in Australia. One of my mates that I'd formed there was the general manager of an insurance company, and he sort of got me into going for the interviews with their national investigations manager, and they were happy with what I could do, and they sort of indicated, well, why don't you come on board and see what you can do? And then I sort of then formed my own company because I already had sort of a client to go with, And then from that, then the work just sort of built up very, very, very quickly. And I built a bit of a name for myself.
We'll be right back.
As long as there have been secrets, there have been spies. And as long as there have been spies, there have been incredible gadgets. If you enjoy learning about the history of espionage, then make sure you're not missing out on another great new podcast series as well, titled A History of the World in Spy Objects from Spyscape Studios. Each episode covers an incredible tool or device and its real-world use, including the infamous Bulgarian poison-tipped umbrella, the Aston Martin DB4, the Enigma machine, and even the B-2 stealth bomber. The series is hosted by historian Alice Loxton from History Hit TV and includes commentary from Daniel Arsham, Anthony Horowitz, Jason Isaacs, and Thomas Heatherwick. A hidden history of the world itself begins to emerge as we are brought closer to the fiercely guarded secrets of intelligence communities. Listen to A History of the World in Spy Objects, hosted by Alice Loxton from Spyscape Studios, available now wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, I see. That makes a lot of sense, because I would imagine it'd be very difficult to start out without having a reputation in the area that you want to work in and without having built up that network of connections, though. So it sounds like a very useful transitional period there for a couple of years after you left the service, and then building up that reputation, moving to Australia, and then kind of hitting the ground running there. So, yeah. Robert, you did very briefly mention a couple of long-term undercover roles. Is there anything that you can share about that now? Does this involve like getting a job at a certain company to find out what's going on the inside, or am I way off base with that?
No, look, I can talk about it now because it's going back to the late 80s and early 90s. Because the guy that sponsored me to come to Australia had recently been high up within a government intelligence agency, he had a lot of contacts. So when he formed his company, he initially got me to go through the interview process, which I already mentioned, and then if that wasn't going to work out, he's going to give me a job. So he already had significant connections in various government authorities. So when I first came out, I then did a couple of very small sort of surveillance jobs. And then he talked me into, well, didn't really talk me into, he suggested I do this long-term job. And that was basically for the Urban Transit Authority of New South Wales. So I then went in undercover there because there was an assessment, there was a new ticketing machine that was brought in, and that tickets for public transport was being on-sold. And they worked out that the losses were around about $9 million in a pretty short period of time. And this is going back, like I say, to sort of 89. So $9 million then was very significant. So with something like that, I then had to go through various sort of training to learn the ropes of that standard role. And with that, I was getting paid an investigator's rate and also the jobs role rate as well. And from there, my job was to observe and see what was going on and see if I could identify any individuals that was involved in these movement and resale of these tickets, and then target that. And then on my debriefs, then external surveillance assets would then be utilised to tail those people when the tickets were being moved around. Covert surveillance devices were installed in various locations, such as the ticket sales, offices, etc. And so I did that for over 6 months. If I would have been found out there, I'd have probably been disappeared. It was very unionised. It was quite a dynamic situation. From there, so I was never sort of put in the stand to give evidence. All the intelligence and information and evidence came from the external assets, and 18 people were arrested from that, me doing that undercover role, and also the people that were targeting. Next one that sort of literally happened about 3 weeks later was even more demanding, and that again was a transport situation. So another transport organisation is called TrackFast, which is part of the State Rail Authority of New South Wales. From that, I went in undercover, a group of 15 people. It was a very large organisation involved in the sort of movement of goods on the railways for not just New South Wales, but Australia-wide. And from that, there were a couple of crime gangs that were basically controlling a lot of very organised theft. So theft rings within the organisation, but at the same time, there was also corruption within the organisation at really the highest levels, where people were getting kickbacks to allow things to happen and allow things to move and like turn a blind eye. So that was very dangerous to the extent that obviously came out that someone was undercover from my reports where, again, external assets were being used to follow people around, covert surveillance devices installed, and overall a huge big umbrella of investigations sort of on top of what I was doing. So again, I was just identifying ringleaders. I was pretty lucky that I sort of became fairly friendly with one of these very serious people. During my period there, a lot of people were getting bashed and put in hospital and, literally get their legs and arms broken. And it happened to me, so I came out of one of the containers, the wagons, was walking along in between the tracks, in between these like four trains, and the next thing there is these four very, very large Lebanese gentlemen that were to basically break my legs or end me. So I was lucky enough that one of these guys then came along and just said, "Oh, it's okay. Bob's okay. He's with us. Leave him alone." I was pretty lucky on that one, but soon after that, I sort of highlighted the fact that I'm going to be blown really soon, so time for me to pull out. So I was pulled out, and then the further investigations carried on. And then that was actually referred, that investigation, the whole gamut of the investigation with all the different agencies, was then referred to what was a new organisation called ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption. So that was their second investigation, and that involved the government corruption and everything else that sort of was tied in with all that. And I believe something like 36 people were arrested in relation to that. There were significant changes that were made in the management, in the oversight of basically everything within that organisation. And the strange thing is, later on, that same organisation, the State Rail Authority, I ended up doing all their surveillance and investigation work after I formed my company. So I didn't want to do any more undercover work after that. I then worked for a number of other organisations, surveillance, learning how the private sector worked, and also spending a fair bit of time sort of playing soldiers with the commandos, parachuting and sort of going on exercises on the weekends and sort of 1 or 2 nights a week doing things with the commandos. And then I decided, look, all these other people are making money out of my expertise. Maybe I should do something about it. And that's when I did have a discussion with a friend of mine who was in the commandos, who I indicated he was a general manager of an insurance company. That opened the doors, and then from that, I then went and sort of targeted other insurance organisations, government organisations, and within a short period of time, I picked up quite a few, and the company sort of grew very, very quickly to the extent that from a small rented office, I ended up buying my own office and building more of an insurance-related investigation company where we are literally turning over 100, sometimes even 150 investigations a week. It was crazy at one point. So I had a lot of staff,
wow.
a lot of 48 contractor investigators out on the ground, and I believe at one point I had the biggest in Australia. And that was all within just a few years of me setting things up to commence my own company and get in amongst it and run my own race and be my own boss.
Wow. That must have been an incredible learning curve for you to build up that quickly to such a huge organization after doing things on your own to begin with. I guess, did you take a lot of lessons from the company that you worked with right when you got out of the service, or did you kind of do things your own way right from the start?
Look, I sort of did my own sort of thing anyway. They you're given parameters. You're going to go in there and do surveillance. You've got to do this, that, and the other. And then I would sort of work things out slightly different than what others. And I was getting some great results. And going back to one of those government authorities, I basically ran a surveillance job, just like a military operation. So I had two of the guys from the commandos come and join me. We drove from Sydney down to this very remote area in Victoria, and did a drive past CTR, close target recce, then parked the vehicle up, and then in the night time, the three of us went round and walked around the location. As I indicated, it's a very remote, rural area. And all it was a liability investigation matter, but this guy was trying to go for like $12 million. And so we ended up sort of putting this place under surveillance, and we just struck lucky where I had the two guys out on the ground and I was in the vehicle doing the vehicle follows. And this guy ended up moving two truckloads of furniture. This guy was supposed to be in a wheelchair, and we've got him lifting heavy things and doing all sorts of stuff like that. And then I followed into another location. So I ended up getting over 12 hours of video and something like 900 photos of this guy get up to it. And, we saved the client over $7 million. And from that sort of made a name for myself. And it was quite sort of funny where I gave them the operational orders as well. And I always remember this because there was 3 judges, 8 barristers, and my client was the corporate counsel of this government authority. And this judge just said, well, what is the cling film for? Why have you taken cling film in? And I just said, well, it's when you dig a hole, you line it with cling film, and if you need to go to the toilet, do a poo or whatever, then you go in there, cling film up, stick it in your bag and take it with you. And they're all going, oh my God, oh. So
man,
it was quite funny. So you never leave what's called sign. But again, like I say, they were sort of like basic sort of operations. But then later on, I built the company up to be more diverse, more security related, and then I ended up sort of tying in with the mining industry, both in Australia and overseas, and that's when things really sort of kicked off to be quite interesting.
Okay. Yeah, that must have been just a meteoric rise there. So did you take an active involvement in investigations, or did you have to hand that off to your employees pretty quickly?
No. I just sort of oversee the business and oversee the company, but I love being out on the ground. I still used to love getting in the camps and getting out on the ground and doing surveillance, whether it's a drug manufacturing operation, marijuana in these remote places, or whether it's, stolen goods, or whether it's even just insurance sort of stuff. So I still would get on the ground a fair bit, and I sort of trained up a couple of guys to go for the reports. So my company sort of built its reputation very quickly on the standard of our reports. So those reports were extremely detailed. And where the video was taken, you'd take video captures of that and input that in the report. So I believe I was one of the first companies to sort of like tie in with that and really sort of paint the picture, because a picture paints 1,000 words. And so they could sort of see what was happening from all that. And it was extremely detailed. But no, virtually the whole time I've had my company, I've always wanted to sort of get out on the ground and not be stuck behind a desk. That's just not really me.
I see. Did you end up working like for several big clients overall, or were you taking on like new jobs, new clients all the time over the years?
No, but yeah, it was really. So I built so at one point, we started off with one insurance company. Next thing we had 8 insurance companies and 50 law firms and their clients, and a number of government organisations as well, of which some of them are still my clients. But the thing is, a massive corporate collapse in Australia called FAI and HIH, and when they collapsed, there was a $4 billion fallout. And then after that, the insurance-related investigation work virtually dried up in 6 months. And then the government legislated that instead of surveillance and that and as evidence, that everything they was relying on after that was going to be what the doctors sort of said. The work just completely sort of dropped. It went in free fall. There was insurance-related law firms that basically either ceased to exist or closed down whole floors or whole offices because the work just dried up. But then around about that time, the security part of my company then really started to sort of take off. So then I diversified into more sort of being more of a security consultancy and provision of security assets and security advice, and as well as carrying on with a number of my regular clients with whatever surveillance or background investigations and intelligence type information and sort of business intelligence that is what they wanted. It really has changed and molded throughout the years as either the economic, business, or whatever climate has changed. You've had to sort of diverse into different other areas to basically to keep the business running. So.
Okay, I've got it. Yeah, that was a perfect time to pivot, it sounds like, with the security business taking off. So was that something that was primarily in Australia, or were you providing this consultancy and services all over the world?
In relation to the sort of mining exploration program, I got tied in with some interesting people there that sort of vouched for us. And so the next thing we were doing things, the company was sort of tying in, giving advice in PNG in the Philippines, around Southeast Asia. We gave the advice in relation to the pre-purchase of the Gold Ridge mine in the Solomons. So a number of these areas were really sort of, some areas were basically controlled by bandits, militias, and certainly in the Philippines, the area that we were operating in was completely controlled by the NPA, the New People's Army. In one area in the main island in Luzon, and then in the other area in Mindanao, you had the MNLF, various of the Moros, and it was very difficult and very interesting at the same time. And so I sort of really sort of concentrated on that. Other areas I did look at was when the Gulf Wars kicked off, and certainly Gulf War sort of 2 and the massive private security sort of sector really amped up in Iraq and then later on in Afghanistan. I looked into those sort of areas, but because I've always financed everything myself within my company, I didn't want to take on some sort of financial backer or join forces with another company as being a lesser player within the organisation. And frankly, I was still turning over a very good turnover within Australia and the overseas security sort of assets that we were doing and some of the training sort of stuff we were doing fairly locally, sort of around Southeast Asia and the Pacific Rim. So it's an area that I looked at and an area that I didn't go ahead with.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, there were a lot of contracts being let, of course, in those areas after 2002, 2003, and on, of course. But I can see how you already had a lot going on in other areas as well. So, since you mentioned these mines and these very dangerous areas, were you providing guard services, or were you just doing like consulting and risk assessments and that sort of thing?
Well, one of the biggest jobs that I had was I actually just went over there to initially do a risk assessment, and then we was going to provide the operations people to then manage a clear up of a mining site to have an exploration program put in. So basically, it was a site that was already owned by a large mining organisation. A massive amount of gold was found. They then end up having 25,000 illegal prospectors swarm this area. They lost control of the security aspects there. Then at the same time, they had the NPA come in and try and extort them and actually execute 5 local workforce members. Then straight after that, or during that period, a cyclone hit the place, caused massive damage, and so they listed this, it's basically a massive mountain with big gold seams throughout the mountain and the local area in this one area, in this tenement, and they listed it for sale for a certain amount. A small dynamic company picked it up. They purchased the mining rights of that and to 7 other locations, some of which were in Mindanao. They wanted someone to go over there and check it out to see that A, it was safe enough that they could send the geos in, and B, if they could do an exploration program and find out where these things exactly were. And then The next thing was to build significant infrastructure and then do a full mine site where they sort of worked out it's going to be valued at hundreds of millions of dollars to pull that out. So they end up having a number of backers. They then approached me. I then went over with one of my guys from the Commandos, big guy called Fitzy. The initial thing was supposed to be just to do the security review, but they then sort of had two Australians and come over with us that were going to set up the offices that they'd organised in Makati City and Manila. So we went over there, and then I was going around the location, and there were still like thousands of these illegal prospectors mining the sites. Very dangerous, just holes everywhere. And we could literally see that they were pulling out bits of gold all over the place. At the same time, there was a number of large amounts of assay results that were left in this bunker where the MPA had tried to use explosives to access that, and they had gained entry. The second day, we was walking around and 15 MPA came out of the trees. They pointed guns at us. This idiot came up, stuck his AK right under my nose, and he had his finger on the trigger, which was quite interesting. Pushed him away. We then went off and met up with the head sort of MPA guy there. I think he was called himself Captain Courageous or some silly living name like that. And there was another guy there that called himself Major Danger. I mean, it was all quite bizarre. And then we sort of had this allowance that we could carry on doing this initial reviews, but with the view that if anything argued up, that they wanted to extort money from us, which I obviously highlighted. And then various other meetings, and during one of those meetings, they threatened to execute two of the Philippines GOs that we had with us because they were carrying radios. And they stated that they must be military radios, so we must be military spies. So it was all quite interesting. Then we end up meeting another guy higher than those guys, who then gave us the authority to basically set things up. And then from there, it was just 6 months of clearing the area, making new roads in, clearing out the illegal prospectors, getting the portable drilling rigs in, setting everything up. And during the whole time, we was being harassed by the MPA to the extent that they thought that they weren't getting paid enough. What we ended up doing was end up employing a number of these people that would come in, drop off their weapons in an Atat Basha just outside of the main guard facility that we built, come in, sign in, and then walk back out again and get their weapons and go straight off into the jungle again. And then we'd sort of end up sort of getting around the thing where we're not paying the MPA, we're paying for the workers. But yeah, it became a real nonsense in that location, and even worse in Mindanao, where on one of the occasions where we were going out to make an assessment of the clearance operations of one of these tenements, we went through this village and there was a number of heads that had been chopped off from the village elders on the one side, what they called the Barangi captain, the local mayor. They obviously hadn't agreed to whatever the terrorists had indicated what they want, so they'd killed them and cut their heads off to prove a point. And it just became untenable. So by then, we had already been liaising with the military, and we also had the ex-head of one of the intelligence organisations as one of our consultants. And it just became rather silly over there. And then they sent a team to either kidnap or kill my guys in our offices in Makati City. So my guys were supposed to be protecting people, then end up having to have armed protection themselves. So we just liaised with the military, and the military went in there and basically killed or captured all of the people that had been harassing us, and I had to close the site down, much to the dismay of the people that had put all that money in there and confirmed the gold deposits with the drilling operations. To my knowledge, location is still covered in illegal prospectors still digging gold out even nowadays. I did that job in the 90s. So
okay, yeah, what a turn of events there. Yeah, that sounds like you had your work cut out for you. So you were essentially the point man for this mining concern, you were having to negotiate with the MGA or the MPA
Yep.
and with the local government on behalf of them and pay these guys off to keep them from attacking and killing the workers?
Well, look, paying employees that were working on
Mm-hmm.
for the clearance that really would come in and leave within minutes, sometimes 5 minutes. Maybe they go and do an hour or a couple of hours work and then take off and go back out. But yeah, they was always
Gotcha.
pretty heavily armed. But we had this agreement that they wouldn't come into the site itself. So basically, I went in there, did the security review, worked out what needed to be done, built a guard facility, a barracks, an armory, updated the administration building, built kilometres and kilometres of fencing and a clear zone, attached electricity, lighting, water, everything that people could be sort of living on site, provided the operations management, provided the security advisors, training the security. And yeah, there was a lot to it. My initial sort of thing was I just went out there at the initial point, went out there again later on to confirm everything was going well. But I was then really running things from Australia. But, at the same time, my guys that were detailed as the operations management, all ex-special forces guys, were dealing with these terrorists on virtually a daily basis.
Man. So ultimately, this venture did shut down. I mean, it sounds like an almost untenable situation with the thousands of prospectors and everything.
Yeah. Look, the prospectors sort of came in after the military went in, cleared up the sort of terrorists, but you can never successfully get rid of all of them. If anything, another unit would come from another location. So after that, the military set up within the camp complex itself, and they set up another base outside of there to dominate and control that area. You could never rely that there was always going to stay there. We couldn't rely on the security because on 2 occasions, MPA came in fully tooled up to the teeth. About 30 of them came in with heavy weapons and just went up to the security, and the security just basically vanished, broke into the armory and stole the firearms and just took off again. So it was,
Man.
and my guys, again, I had to pull them out on a couple of occasions. So it was a very difficult sort of area to try and operate in successfully unless we end up having a massive workforce. Then I worked it out that they'd have had to increase just in relation to my security planning side of things and the amount of guys that I needed. And the fact that my guys were not allowed to carry firearms. So what we did was my guys would always have 2 of the armed security with them. And in the event of a drama, they was just going to take a firearm or firearms off them if they needed. And yeah, it was a very difficult working environment. So it became, when I suggested it, they're going to have to input another 15 million US, they wasn't going to find that type of money. It all became a bit silly, and so I closed things down and pulled my guys out.
Okay. Yeah, very understandable considering that situation there. So besides yourself, it sounds like if it wasn't you, it takes a very, very unique kind of individual to maneuver through these sort of situations. So did you have like a trusted group of people within your company that you could send off on this type of, very hairy situation overseas, or did you have to go handle a lot of it on your own?
No. My initial thing was just me, and then I left one of these guys there, and then the other guys were coming out after that, and then I was doing changeovers every 6 weeks. So yeah, it was my guys and those guys that I used there were all special forces, ex-military, or serving guys for the commandos. Time service. So that was for that security aspects, and the whole time my company in Australia was still turning over like surveillance jobs and things like that. And with that, there are guys that I'd initially trained up or already had training, say they was in the police dog squad, the surveillance squad, and other guys that had been sort of in the private investigation industry for quite a while. They sort of met up to my standards to the extent that some of the guys that still work for me on and off have worked for me on and off for over 25 years, and they're still with me.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So is the company still running right now? Like, have you pivoted it to other types of work recently?
The company has cut right back, and that's basically down to me cutting right back and also diversifying myself into other businesses. And to the extent that, like, for the last 17 years, I've been more overseas than I have been in Australia. But look, the company it has still been operating. I mean, we ended up having a job last year that was almost seven figures, and that was just for a surveillance job for 5 months. Yeah, so look, there's still sort of semi-regular work from clients that I've had for quite some time, law firms, government authorities, but I've cut it right back, and there's a fairly big reason for that. I had a very significant heart attack 3 years ago that sort of slowed me down. I ended up getting a couple of guys sort of running things and just sort of maintaining the company, and then just lately I've had something even worse that I've just gone through. So I've sort of pulled back a fair bit, but at the same time, I'm still sort of like the figurehead of the company. But yeah, is the company anywhere near as big as what it used to be? Well, the simple fact is no. We sort of work, or my company now works on sort of contract by contract. So it's not as if I've got a lot of people in the office and a lot of people working for me full time. It's more just a couple of guys in the office, the use of contractors or subcontractors. I mean, just say, for instance, just in the last few days, I was asked to go and do something to provide assistance in Africa. And rather than send any of my guys over there that were willing to go, I didn't have a footprint on the ground in that part of the country, no contacts or whatever. So I just passed it on to a mate of mine that's got a security company in America, and he's now taken over that job, and he'll be handling it and providing the services that the client obviously requires due to the threat level.
Okay, I see. So do you find yourself with a little bit more free time to enjoy the fruits of your labor at this point?
I'm always busy, mate. No, but look.
I got that feeling. Yeah, I didn't think you were one to sit back and rest.
Well, look, I mean, look, I just talk about it, but I've just gone through 2 months of radiotherapy, so radiation treatment for cancer every day for 2 months, which sort of really slowed me down. In the background, I still sort of overseeing things, surveillance and things like that, but nothing major. And would I get out on the ground or do anything at this present moment in time? The simple fact is no, but I can still sort of oversee things and make sure, review the reports and things like that. So things are still ticking, but to a much lesser extent. One thing, as you sort of, am I still doing things? Look, I've been diversified into all sorts of areas. I mean, I've got a bit of a property portfolio that brings in an income, my own sort of pension fund that I personally run. Also, I had a number of properties in France that I went over and developed and turned them into very successful rental properties. One of those was a chateau in France, 8-bedroom chateau. We had a Michelin chef that was coming in and cooking and for the guests, and I was running wine events and things. So I've really diversified. But during that whole period of time as well, even though I was in France working on that and sort of enjoying myself with travel and stuff, the company was still operating over here because, I had a couple of guys, as I indicated, worked with 25 years, and that job went like clockwork. As all the other jobs that I've been done, whether I'm here or not, I've still been facilitating. No matter where I am, I mean, everyone goes on about since COVID that, that they can do this remote work and things like that. Well, I've been doing that for 17 years after sort of deciding to do things in France. I've been a bit of an entrepreneur there, so still running the investigation company, the security management company, training aspects, as well as developing properties and sort of managing that chateau as well. So I've kept myself very busy.
Yeah, I can tell that's quite a life and quite a legacy you've built there. So, Robert, I'm curious. I do have quite a few listeners who are, military members, and as someone who got out and went on to a great success, do you have any suggestions or advice for people who might want to move into private sector investigations, private sector security, that sort of thing after they transition out of the service?
tie in with a well-respected company first. Your skill sets, your military skill sets will certainly help. With the security side of things, like with, say, what the SAS have done in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff, a lot of those guys, like, naturally transition into either going on the circuit, the bodyguard circuit, or security, or providing security advice and stuff like that. But yeah, look, there's still definitely plenty of opportunity there in relation to the big sort of money thing that I found for my company has always been surveillance. I learned my sort of trade doing surveillance against terrorist targets in Northern Ireland. The training aspects as well. You guys, whether it's the American Special Forces or even just the standard military, there is definitely plenty of scope. Don't sort of limit yourself to think that you've got to become a security guard or anything like that. Consider yourself as being a useful tool and an asset to any employer that looks at employing you, because the thing is, the military would have given you that self-discipline and a number of skill sets that can be utilized in all over the place. I mean, okay, in the States, firearms are generally used. In Australia, they're really not used. I mean, it's extremely difficult to get firearms license. In the past, you could utilize them for sort of bodyguard work and cash in transit, and now it's very, very tied up and limited. In Australia and the UK, it's even tighter than that. Yeah, it's not just about carrying a weapon or doing war-y things. There's many, many things that you can put yourself in there. Just the fact that you're self-disciplined and that, you can see things outside of the square, while with maybe some civilian environment sort of jobs that people will go in there with one directional thought. I've always found with my military guys that they think outside the square. They can be utilised. Also, on top of that, you've no problems doing long and hard hours. With some of the jobs that you don't have to be. They're tougher than say someone who's a civilian that has only done a 9 to 5. There's plenty of other jobs out there that really are not 9 to 5. And there are there's a lot of organisations such as mine, whether it's in the States, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in the UK, anywhere else. You're useful, and you're very useful. But don't think that everything's going to jump into your lap as soon as you leave the military. Learn what needs to be learned in whatever industry you want to go into. Take it from there and just utilise those skill sets. If you're going straight into, say, security work or whatever like that, well, then that's an easy, natural transition. However, if you're looking at other stuff, I mean, there's managerial roles and all sorts of stuff, NCOs. Yeah, sky's the limit. Never limit yourself. With me, I never did. So, as I've indicated, I was in the army at 16 years old, and I've never thought that to be limiting me. So, do you need half a dozen degrees and things like that? Well, in some roles you do. I mean, my son was an officer in the British Army after me, and he's got something like 7 degrees, and he's doing extremely well as a very senior project manager, doing work in a number of countries. So he's utilised his as officers, trainers to go into that side of things. But just even if you're just a grunt or whatever like that, don't limit yourself. Don't restrict yourself with what you think you can or can't do. Just get out there and do your best. And if you put 110% in, you'll find that that's probably more effort than other people around you.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's incredible, Robert. I really appreciate it. And thank you for talking to me tonight. This has really been very enlightening stuff. I was not expecting your company to have gone through some of the stuff you went through with the mining contract and that sort of thing. So that was really, really enlightening, honestly. I'm curious, do you have a public social media or website or anything you can direct people to if they want to learn more about you after listening here?
The only sort of, look, I am on Facebook, but that's just from my links with Instagram. I've become slightly addicted to Instagram, according to my wife. So I seem to be always on it. So, yeah, look, I do have an Instagram profile. It's Plantagenet_manor. So Plantagenet Manor was my chateau in France. I've not bothered changing the name. So if you look under Robert Lancaster, and then there's a little sort of castle sort of thing there. So Plantagenet Manor is my sort of profile. From that, it sort of ties in with a link to my Facebook. So I do love the old Instagram. That actually does go into a number of photos from my military service and travels and stuff. But other than that, yeah, look, my company is Lancasters-global.com. And that really is the only sort of profile I've sort of got out there. I have done a number of things with the media in the past, but I haven't done anything just lately. And as you've indicated at the start, I sort of keep a fairly low profile under the radar, and I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah, I'm very glad that I stumbled onto you in the first place. Honestly, you're certainly one of the most interesting people that I've been following on Instagram, so it's been great to keep up with you over the past year or so. I really appreciate your time, Robert. Thank you so much for talking to me about this tonight.
Well, thank you as well, and I really appreciate your IG profile as well. It's been very enlightening, and some of the people there you've had extremely interesting. Thanks very much for tying me in with this, and this is the first cast I've done. I've been asked to do quite a few in the past and been interested, but I admire what you do, and I was happy to do this today.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I was very surprised that you accepted my offer when I presented it in the first place, but here we are. So thanks again, Robert. I'll definitely stay in touch with you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Good on you, mate. Cheers.
If you're interested in more of Spycraft 101, look for my page on Instagram at Spycraft 101. You can also find more great articles on my website, spycraft101.com. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll stick around because there is lots more to come.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The stories and statements expressed herein are experiences and opinions. They may not reflect the views of the host or the production studio. It's okay if you disagree with our content. No piece of media is right for everyone. If you love Spycraft 101, please check us out online, on Instagram, on YouTube, and especially on Patreon. Thank you for listening.